In this video, I'm going to be going over 10 more common rules mistakes, a follow-up video to my last one I made, and since 1.6 just dropped, I feel like this is the perfect time to do it. If you could take a second to like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it a lot. I'm really close to 500, just a few more of you and then I get there. And if you haven't seen the first one of this, I recommend watching it because this kind of goes off of that. I received a lot of positive feedback on the last video because people liked it a lot. I heard a lot of other rules as well that people thought I should have included but didn't. So some of those are in here, along with some more that I thought of. The first one, this was the biggest feedback on the ones that I missed, so I thought I'd add it as the first rule here, is that icons aren't per player. I made this mistake. when I first started playing. Notably, almost all of my rules mistakes that I remember making like this were in the Mad Titan's Shadow. Dealing encounter cards per player when I had a Hazard icon out for that campaign was really hard, especially when I had just started playing. So I thought these cards were a great way to show the actual ruling, because if you just move on to playing things other than Rhino, it's really easy to forget. But it says, Hazard icon, deal +1 encounter card during the villain phase. Notice that's not +1 per player. The per player symbol is that little like person thing right next to the when revealed effect that says place an additional 1 per player threat here. But this is just +1 encounter card during the villain phase. And similarly with acceleration tokens, it says place +1 threat on the main scheme at the start of the villain phase, not 1 per player. So if you've lost a few games to that, well, hopefully you don't anymore, because you can remember that it's not quite as hard as it seems like it is sometimes. This was a big one for me. I used Thanos' treacheries here because Thanos was the one where I realized I was doing this wrong because I kept losing to him over and over and over again. When I first started playing, I thought, okay, he has a face down boost card. I'm flipping this card face up. That means I'm revealing the card because I couldn't see what the card was, and now I can, so I revealed it. So then I would count the boost icons and then also do the when revealed effects on those cards, which was really brutal. It's very difficult to win when stuff like that happens. So here's 2 examples of like when revealed hero, Thanos attacks you, this attack gains overkill and piercing. So I would have attacked myself again. And then when revealed, put the top card of the Infinity Stone deck into play, meaning I would have got 2 Infinity Stones on that. Don't do that. When you're looking at boost cards, just count the boost symbols. The only exception is if there's a star in the bottom corner, you read only the star that's on the card. Never do the when revealed on a boost card unless the star specifically tells you. The icons are separate from these when revealed effects. This is one that I didn't personally make, but I've heard of people making this mistake, and I can see how easy it would be to do that. You don't have to beat stage 1, 2, and 3 of the villain. You only play 2. So if you're on standard, you play 1 and 2, and expert, you play 2 and 3. The Rhino scheme here, like if you read the scheme on the contents, it says Rhino 1 and 2, and then Rhino 2 and 3 instead for expert mode, meaning that in expert you use 2 and 3 but not 1, and then yeah, so it's just two phases of the villain. A lot shorter game that way as well. Now the unique icon, this is a mistake that I was making until actually quite recently after I'd started posting YouTube videos. The unique icon says a card with a unique icon before its title is unique. The players as a group are permitted to have only 1 copy of each unique card by title in play. A player cannot include more than 1 copy of each unique card by title in their deck. The identity card is included in this evaluation. So the way I used to play it, which was wrong, was that I would, whenever I was building decks for like 1 or 2 player or more, I would never include 2 copies of the same ally, because I thought, okay, the unique rule would mean that I can't have Nick Fury in play at the same time, and I can't include Nick Fury in both of our decks. But that's actually not true. Nick Fury is totally okay for all 4 people to play in their deck. You just can't all play them at the same time. So if you want to start a Nick Fury train where Nick Fury is played every single turn by at least 1 player, you can definitely do that. Four Nick Furies in the discard pile for some reason is totally fine, but just not in play. Never 2 in play at the same time. You can have 2 copies of the same ally, or 1 copy of 1 ally in 2 different players' decks. You just can't have multiple copies of Nick Fury in 1 player's deck, and you can never have 2 Nick Furies in play, 2 or more Nick Furies in play at the same time. This is a multiplayer specific one, requesting actions. So an action is a type of triggered ability. Players are permitted to trigger action abilities during their turn or by request during other players' turns. Players can only trigger action abilities on cards they control or on encounter cards. Players cannot trigger action abilities on obligations in other players' play areas. So this part where it says players are permitted to trigger action abilities during their turn or by request during other players' turns can change the game state a lot. So the example I brought up here is if one player has a guard minion, but like let's say they have a really big attack. Let's say Spider-Man is engaged with Hydra Mercenary, but has Swinging Web Kick in his hand, which could deal 8 damage to the villain and win the game, but you can't do that because there's the guard engaged with you. If another player happens to have Relentless Assault in their hand, even if it's not their turn, the Spider-Man player could say, hey, can you use Relentless Assault to take out this Hydra Mercenary that I'm engaged with? And then the other player can, since says action, deal 5 damage to a minion, you can do that on the Spider-Man player's turn. That can change the sequencing of how you do things and change the outcome of a lot of different games. So if you're not doing that, make sure to request actions to get things to be as efficient as you can in multiplayer. And another example I wanted to bring up was Helicarrier. So this one is more obvious because it says that you can reduce the cost for any player, but that also is just a general rule. Because it's an action, you're allowed to do that. And similarly, you can play events that help other people on their turn as long as it says action. A warning, though, is that a basic attack is not an action. It has to say action, and then whatever. So you can't attack with your basic attack to take out this Hydra Mercenary. It has to be an action. Number 6 is that some obligations can actually help you. I gave Peter Parker's obligation here because it allows you to flip to alter ego form. Notably, if you are flipped to alter ego form with your obligation, you can flip back up to hero form on your turn. It doesn't like use your flip for the turn. So a rules mistake people could make is that like you get your obligation and then you have to stay in alter ego for that whole turn, but that's not how it works. And then there's also this benefit of if you get to flip to alter ego form, you suddenly get access to your alter ego abilities and your hero abilities in the same turn, which can be really powerful. Spider-Man gets a mental resource, and then Aunt May will get to heal you 4 damage. So this card of exhausting Peter Parker to remove it from the game, but you also get to flip, can oftentimes be a benefit. There's a lot of other heroes that are similar to that as well. Number 7 is about defense. When a player initiates a triggered ability labeled as a defense, such as Hero Interrupt defense, during an enemy attack, that player's identity becomes the defender and is considered to have defended the attack if there was not already a defender. So, for instance, you don't have to exhaust to do this either. So the normal way you do a defense is you exhaust your hero and then you're the defender of the attack. But let's say Spider-Man's ally is getting attacked, or not ally. Let's say the other player is getting attacked. Spider-Man can play jump flip from hand that says defense. Hero Interrupt defense when you would take any amount of damage, prevent 2 of that damage. And if you paid for this card using an energy resource, remove 2 threat from the main scheme. And then that would also trigger cards such as Electrostatic Armor. After you defend against an attack, deal 1 damage to that attacking character. So this can combo really well in protection. And then you might be missing out on a lot of different defense builds that you could do, and a lot of output from those protection builds if you didn't realize that this defense labeled events count as defense and then give you all of your abilities. This one is a little more tricky than the other ones I've gone over so far. Number 8 is about the response window, and this falls under the triggering condition rule. A triggering condition is a specific occurrence that takes place in the game. On card abilities, the triggering condition is the element of the ability that references such an occurrence, indicating the timing point at which the ability may be used. The description of an ability's triggering condition usually follows the word when or after. Each interrupt and response ability can only be triggered once per occurrence of its triggering conditions. Multiple copies of a card with an interrupt or response can each be triggered by the same triggering condition. If a single game occurrence creates multiple triggering conditions, such as a single attack causing a character to both take damage and be defeated, those triggering conditions are handled with a single interrupt window and a single response window. During each of these windows, abilities that refer to any of the triggering conditions created by the occurrence may be used in any order. So this is a little convoluted and confusing to read, but the way you can think about this in a simpler way that will be accurate, a game occurrence causes a response window to open. So in this case, for both of these events, it's after a hero attacks and defeats an enemy, after you attack and defeat an enemy. So it's the same response, it's the same trigger here. And then in that window, you can use your responses and interrupts until the next game occurrence occurs. In practice, what that means is if you defeat an enemy, you can play Chase Them Down and Moment of Triumph in response to that enemy being defeated. And then you can keep triggering whatever interrupts and responses you have that work with the timing condition. So let's say it's action, you attack and defeat an enemy. That's the triggering condition. And then until your next action, you are open in this response window. And you can play these responses and hero responses. So don't think that you can only use one response or one interrupt. You can do multiple. So for instance here, multiple copies of a card with an interrupt or response can be triggered by the same triggering condition. But even if you had 2 chase them downs, you could use both of them in response to the same condition. That one's a little more confusing as well, but I hope that makes sense now. This one is one of my favorites, and it will also help you the most. So this is about attacking. When an attack ability has its damage increased by another ability, each instance of damage in that attack ability that does not use the word additional is increased by the specified amount. So the classic combo for this is going to be a Hone Technique Dive Bomb. Hone Technique says when you play an aggression attack event, if you paid for that using a mental resource, increase the amount of damage that event deals by its printed cost. And now if we look at Dive Bomb, it says deal 7 damage to an enemy, deal 1 damage to each other enemy. It does not say deal additional damage. That means that based off this ruling, Hone Technique will be increasing it by its cost, so it's for cost. So that means you'll deal 11 damage to one enemy, and then deal 5 damage to each other enemy. That's an entire board wipe. And if you miss out on that extra 4 damage to every other enemy on the board, that's a big miss. This combo is incredibly powerful, and there are multiple different combos like this that just seem obscenely broken, but it's actually legal. And the final one is a Jubilee ruling. Since Jubilee just came out, I wanted to include something about her. There was a couple things I noticed here. When I read 3 steps ahead, it said for each different resource type, energy, mental, physical, and wild you use to pay for this card, choose a scheme and remove 2 threat from it. And I got kind of confused when I read that because I was wondering why they included both the energy, mental, and physical and wild. Like why wild was there, especially when it's a 3-cost card, but there's 4 resources listed. And that brings up, based off this ruling, wild resources can be spent to pay the resource cost of cards and abilities. When a player generates a wild resource, they may specify which resource type, energy, mental, physical, or wild it is being used as. So wild is actually its own type, which I kind of didn't realize. I always played it as if wild was a resource that would transform into either energy, mental, or physical. I didn't realize that it could be its own type. Like that wild was its own distinction that I could spend it as. Unfortunately, there is this limit in the rules that says while paying a cost, a player is permitted to generate resources beyond the specified cost. Resources generated beyond the specified cost are considered to have been overpaid for that cost and were not paid for that cost, which is really, really sad for Jubilee because Jubilee ideally would like to spend energy, mental, physical, and wild, and get 4 different resources types for 3 steps ahead. But it doesn't work like that most of the time. But I did think of an example that could be really fun that I really like. With Strife's main scheme, Left to Your Fate, it says each identity gets +2 hand size and increase the resource cost to play each player card by 1. So that means that 3 steps ahead is actually 4 cost. And then if you use all 4 types, you're not overpaying for that. And this was just a really fun rule that I found with Jubilee and an instance where you could use that I wanted to include since she just came out. I hope this video was helpful for you and maybe you learned a few rules or maybe you knew all of them already, which would be really cool, but let me know in the comments if this was useful. I'm also planning on doing a full review of Rules 1.6 on the channel, where I actually go through the entire rule book and read the entire thing and make a video out of that. If you would like that, let me know because it's going to be a massive undertaking for me to make that video because it's like over 60 pages long, but I'm also really excited to do it. And if you could leave a like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it a lot. So stay zesty. See you next time. Peace.